My son threw wine in my face when I refused to pay the bill at the luxury restaurant. My name is Francine, 73 years old. I live alone in Otter Haven, a place where winter comes early and people greet each other more with glances than words. I'm not a woman you'd remember. Not beautiful, not especially talented. But for 30 years, I was someone's rock. And then one day, I realized no one called me by my name anymore. Just Mom. Just her. Some things in life don't need thunder to wake you up. Sometimes it's just a nod that feels too indifferent. A glance that slides past you. A chair that gets moved away at dinner. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm simply sharing, like someone opening their heart to a stranger on a long late-night train ride. Maybe in the things I've walked through, you've seen pieces of yourself, too. And if you're listening, I hope you'll stay a little while because this story isn't about what I lost. It's about the moment I stopped and decided not to disappear any further. My son chose to throw wine in my face in front of his friends instead of simply saying he didn't need me anymore. I still remember the sound of my old Toyota door closing. That dry, worn-out thud. Like everything else in my life, that night I brought my wallet out of habit. I didn't think I'd need it, but 30 years is long enough to train a reflex. Caleb might forget his. Caleb might fumble. Caleb would turn to me, and I would be there, just like always. I don't belong in places like Chateau Armand, where people laugh from the throat, not the belly. The moment I stepped through the heavy wooden door, I felt like I was carrying the smell of snow, a cold, out-of-place scent trying to sneak through the thick air of wine and expensive perfume. Talia was the first to notice me, or rather, her eyes brushed over me like I was part of the floor.
A vine snod.
Then she went right back to adjusting a wine glass into perfect position. Caleb didn't stand up. He was mid-story, voice loud, gestures exaggerated, like he was talking to a camera. My mom raised me entirely on cash, never borrowed a penny. The men around him laughed, lifted their glasses. A rock-solid foundation, one said. Perfect makings of an investor. They placed me in a side chair near the aisle, half a step from the main table. No silverware, no wine glass. I pulled out the chair, sat down without touching anyone. Dinner carried on like I wasn't there. I wasn't hungry. I remember sitting there for a long time, listening to conversations in a language I didn't understand. Secondary markets, NFT contracts, capital returns. Caleb looked younger than his age, hair trimmed neat, styled with gel. His Apple Watch pulsed each time he tilted his wrist. I looked down at my own hand, an old silver-plated watch, scratched face, stopped ticking last week when the bill came. No one said a word. The server placed the paper on a leather tray, tilted her head, and walked away. Caleb picked it up, glanced at it, expressionless, and pushed it straight toward me. Only $49.78, Mom, he smiled. Not too bad this time. I quietly pulled out my wallet and unzipped it. I had left my card at home. I didn't bring my card today, I said. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I just hadn't prepared to pay for dinner for 8 at a place where I didn't even recognize what was on my plate. Caleb laughed dryly. First time in 35 years, huh? I didn't respond. The table went still. Eyes darted. Someone sipped wine softly. Caleb raised his glass. Red Cabernet, a deep, thick color like blood. I thought he would drink, but then the glass flew. I didn't close my eyes. The sharp-smelling liquid splashed down my face, trickled through my hair, slipped inside my collar. The first feeling was cold, then warmth, and finally the smell. The smell of absurdity. No one said a word. No one got up. Talia signaled the staff, whispered something, pointed to the floor. Without looking at me, I sat still. Then I stood. My wine-soaked sweater clung to me. Drops slowly slid from my chin to my neck. No one handed me a napkin. No one asked if I was all right. They just stayed silent. The kind of silence they teach in fancy places. To keep dinner smooth. To protect the comfort of the wealthy. I didn't blame them. They had no reason to understand me. I walked out of the restaurant, leaving a long trail of water across the stone floor. Snow was still falling, light like salt. It landed in my hair, melted fast, blended with the scent of wine. Outside, my car waited at the far end, the spot for guests without valet. I walked slowly, my steps steady, unhurried. I opened the door, got in, and shut it like closing a book. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't start the engine. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, breath even in the rearview mirror. My face was red from the wine, and from something else I couldn't yet name. Caleb drove a brand new electric car. Tonight, I drove my old Toyota. Uneven heat, wipers that squeaked. I once believed I was doing the right thing, giving everything to my child. Every priority, every provision, every opportunity. I believed love meant giving without holding anything back. I used to take pride in the fact that Caleb never lacked. I started the car. The engine coughed, then settled into a familiar hum. I backed out of the lot. In the mirror, Chateau Armand faded behind me. Golden lights, tall windows, silhouettes raising glasses and bowing heads. A world that was never mine. The drive home felt longer than usual. Maybe because of the snow. Maybe because my heart had slowed. At a red light, I reached for my sweater. The wine smell rose, bitter and acidic. I rolled it up and placed it on the seat beside me. Cold crawled at my arms, but I didn't pull on my coat. I left them bare, let my skin breathe. For the first time in years, after fitting perfectly into expectations, I looked down at my hands, worn, spotted, drier than last year. These were the hands that once fed Caleb spoonfuls of mashed potatoes. I remembered the blue plastic spoon, the old high chair, the way Caleb squinted and smiled every time I made a whooshing sound with the spoon. That little mouth once called me with sounds that weren't full words, but I understood they meant I was needed. And I once believed that if I kept loving, kept giving, kept enduring, Caleb would understand someday. But I was wrong. Everything started to change from that moment on. I used to be fully present in Caleb's first graduation photo. Now my face has been cropped out as if I was never there. I was folding a kitchen towel when my phone buzzed. Miriam had sent a link with a short message. "You should see this." I opened it. An article from the local finance site. Deep blue logo. Bold headline in all caps. Caleb D. Monroe. A young mind reshaping investment for a new generation. I scrolled down. The first photo was a family portrait on the beige sofa. Talia was sitting on the left, her hand resting on Caleb's thigh. Between them, little Audrey, curly-haired and beaming, but I wasn't in the picture. Not in any corner. I zoomed in. The room was familiar. The same chair, the same walls. It used to hold a small oil painting I did in 1986, now replaced with a framed quote, "Build from zero." I went still. I had been there when that photo was taken, wearing a purple sweater, standing just outside the frame, but I wasn't mentioned. I turned off the screen. My eyes drifted past the thin curtain, filtering in soft sunlight. The silver-plated watch I've worn since 1993 ticked along, each second echoing alone. I returned to the dining table and opened the drawer where I kept old records. Every year I printed bank statements, tax returns, and major receipts. One folder, light brown, labeled Caleb, 2014. I opened it. A transfer slip for $84,000 withdrawn from my retirement account to buy his first apartment. A handwritten note read, "For you. No need to repay." I remember that night clearly. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, staring at the numbers. I truly believed that if Caleb had a solid start, he'd never flounder in life. I thought that's what a mother is supposed to do. I met Miriam Thursday morning like every week. Maple and Steam still played soft jazz. The deep red booths, coffee always poured without asking. Miriam always arrived 10 minutes before me. This time she ordered blueberry muffins for both of us. I told her about the article, told it slowly without dramatics. Miriam didn't interrupt. She flipped her sugar packet between her fingers, then nodded. "Do you remember his wedding day?" she asked. I was in the kitchen baking all morning, but the wedding photo on the wall later, I wasn't in it either. Miriam set down her spoon. "I doubt it was an accident. Talia works in media for that luxury furniture company, right?" I nodded. "Then it makes sense to build an image of self-made success." You had to be cropped out. I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness spread down my throat. There was a time Caleb asked me to sign a financial power of attorney. He said it was just to help pay bills if I ever traveled. I skimmed it. It was long, but I signed because he's my son. Miriam's brows furrowed. Full power of attorney. I didn't answer. I couldn't remember. Or maybe I didn't want to. That afternoon, I sat in the armchair near the gas heater. Outside, the sky was gray. Winds swept across the lake, forming ripples. In this little wooden house, I stayed warm with a thin layer of insulation and steady heat. I picked up my phone again and reopened the article. At the very bottom, the acknowledgments Caleb had written. I'm grateful for my wife, my inspiration, and my daughter. My motivation. No mention of mom. Not a single word, as if I were a shadow in a reenacted documentary. I turned on the old printer, loaded fresh paper, and began to write what I remembered. I stood at the edge of his high school graduation, holding flowers. The original photo had me in it. Now it's gone. The day he moved into his first apartment, I stayed behind to clean. I didn't sleep that night. The carpet was still damp. At his wedding, I stood at the back of the church. No place on the main stage. Reason? My dress didn't match the beige-brown palette Talia had chosen. I folded the paper and placed it in a wooden box under the table. I didn't need to read it again. I just needed to write it down to remember I had been there. That night, Miriam messaged, I found something. Come by tomorrow. I'll show you. The next morning, I returned to the diner. Same table by the window. Same coffee. Always topped off without asking. Miriam opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. A property map appeared. The address of Caleb's new home, gray-roofed in the Southbrook development, was under the owner's name, Francine L. Monroe. I didn't understand. You own the land, Miriam said. At least on paper. Maybe Caleb used your name to get the loan. Easier approval, clean credit history, no debt. My throat dried up. I remembered a night 2 years ago. He had handed me a stack of papers. Sign these for me, Mom. Just bank stuff. I'll handle the rest. I signed, didn't ask. Miriam leaned back, arms crossed. You need to review everything in your name. If he's used it to keep his record clean, this isn't just paperwork anymore. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window. An old man walked past with a dog. His hunched shadow printed across the thin snow like a faded scratch on film. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not quite pain, but realization. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased, deliberately removed from my son's story of success. I looked at Miriam. She didn't speak, but her eyes weren't cold. In them, I saw recognition, a quiet validation. You're not crazy. You're not imagining things. I nodded. I'll find a lawyer. Harold's still working, Miriam said. I'll reach out. I gripped my coffee cup. I don't know how far Caleb has gone. I only know this. I can't stay silent any longer. My son doesn't know I still have the second key, and that the house he thinks is fully his still bears my name. I parked in front of Harold's office, just after 9. Snow had thickened on the roof of my car, but I didn't brush it off. I let it sit there like the weight of old memories pressing on my mind these past few days. Harold still worked out of the same place, ground floor of a brown brick building next to the old post office, right on Main Street. The wooden sign out front, faintly lettered, Harold Feynman, attorney at law, hung at a tilt, its metal chain rusted. The bell jingled as I opened the door. I stepped in carrying the cold and a large file folder. Harold looked up from a stack of papers and still wore his felt hat indoors. Glasses slipping down his nose, tie was slightly off-center, but his voice was steady, never judging. Francine thought you were just stopping by to chat. No, I need you to look at something for me. I placed the folder on his desk. Aged papers, ink faded to bluish green. Bank transfers, loan documents, photocopies of contract drafts, and most importantly, the unsigned deed transfer for the house on Sycamore Street. I didn't need to say much. Harold understood. We once lived in the same neighborhood. I knew his wife had passed from cancer. I used to bring him soup. He used to file my taxes for free. Back then, Neighbors helped each other when no one could afford to hire help. He put on his reading glasses, inspected each page carefully, and turned every corner like flipping through an old journal. This is just a draft, not notarized, no seal, and you never signed the final page. I nodded. He thinks I did. Talia brought this over one winter afternoon. She said I just needed to sign so they could apply for some renovation permits. I almost signed, then stopped. You've kept it since then? In a tin box, bottom drawer of my wardrobe. Harold leaned back, fingers interlaced. Under the state's law, you're still a co-owner. They can't sell, transfer, or mortgage the property without your signature. I didn't sigh in relief. I just nodded. A quiet, resolute nod, like nailing something down. Not because I wanted to take back what's his, but because for the first time, I realized there's still something that's mine. I need you to draft a temporary restriction. Block all transactions involving that house until I decide. Francine, you sure about this? I'm not pounding on my son's door. I'm knocking on the door of truth. And this time, I'm not bringing tears. Harold didn't ask further. He reached for his typewriter, that old familiar sound. Clack, clack, ding. Each keystroke striking the worn door of trust. I drove through the Sycamore neighborhood around 11. Snow was still falling. The street looked different now. Old wooden homes replaced by stone facades, black framed glass doors, and steel-edged landscaping. The red maple out front was gone, replaced with a narrow stone walkway leading in a straight, cold line to the front door. Talia had likely hired a designer. Everything bore her signature, from the crystal drop chandelier to the row of succulents, aligned with clinical precision on the porch, but I still recognized it. Still the house I'd spent a decade cleaning, painting, planting. Still the place where I once watched Caleb shoot hoops alone in the backyard. A boy who stuttered, who feared the dark. I didn't go in. I just parked across the street, quietly watching and remembering the last time I lived there. Caleb had just gotten married. He told me it was time to relax, to move somewhere quieter. I nodded, thinking it was for his good. I sold my little lakeside cabin near Otter to help fund the renovations, then quietly stepped back into the old wooden house I now call home, never once asking for anything in return. Now I see I shouldn't have stayed silent for so long. That afternoon I wrote a letter, not an email, no stiff computer font. I wrote it by hand, my old cursive, slightly shaky in places. Caleb, this isn't a reproach. Just a reminder. I once told you, in every house, the one holding the key isn't the loudest voice. It's the one who stayed still when everyone else turned away. I've stayed silent too long. I'm not silent anymore. With what love remains, Mom. I sealed it in an envelope, brought it to the post office myself, waited in line, requested certified mail. The young clerk looked surprised. I still hand-wrote letters. I didn't explain. I just smiled. The kind of smile worn by someone who's just remembered they still hold the key they thought was lost. On the way home, the snow had covered the sign at the end of the street. A few children played with sleds. An old woman was struggling with a grocery cart. I pulled over, stepped out, and helped her lift it into the trunk. "Thank you, dear," she said. I smiled. I didn't correct her, because, maybe for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible anymore. I'm not pounding on my son's door. I'm knocking on truth's door with the law, not with tears. They called it a private Thanksgiving gathering. But it was the first time Caleb barred me from entering the house, a house still under my name. I baked a pie early that morning. Pumpkin, same as every year. Same old recipe I learned from Grandma. Same clunky gas oven that rattles every time I adjust the temperature. I can't remember exactly when Caleb last tasted that pie. Maybe back when he still wore the sweaters I knit. When his hair was always messy, when he clung to my leg every morning after waking up. Now he lives in a 4-bedroom home with a glass-walled office and a lawn trimmed every Monday, all in my name. Though the only entrance left to me is through memory. Helen picked me up around 3. She drove her 2001 Ford, 2 paper bags full of Thanksgiving gifts for her grandkids in the back seat. I sat in front, pie wrapped in a cloth on my lap. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the car, overpowering the stale leather and age-old sweat of the seats. Maybe he really just forgot. Francine, Helen said, men can be terrible at remembering things. I didn't answer. Caleb never forgot my birthday because he never remembered it in the first place. We parked across the street. Caleb's house lit up brilliantly. Golden lights wrapped around each oak tree like ribbons of ceremony. Laughter spilled from the lawn, jazz playing softly through outdoor speakers. The door opened. Guests stepped out for a smoke. Men in beige turtlenecks, women with straightened blonde hair, glasses of wine in hand. I recognized a few from Caleb's investment inspiration group, faces I'd seen in his interviews. I pulled my coat tighter. The wind blew my scarf loose. Helen took my hand. I'll go with you. You're his mother after all. I nodded. We crossed to the sidewalk, facing the main gate. I stopped, fingers tightening around the pie. Caleb stepped out, hair slicked back, crisp white shirt without a wrinkle, eyes that had long forgotten the sleepless nights I sat beside him during fevers. He saw me, not surprised, not happy, just a faint frown, like someone who just got junk mail delivered to his party. He walked up, stopped about 3 feet away. Mom, this is a brand event space. I don't want guests thinking I'm sponsoring someone. I didn't understand right away. A few seconds later, it clicked. He didn't want people to think he was raised on the money or love of a mother in an old wool coat. I nodded, said nothing, handed the pie to Helen, then turned away. I didn't walk slowly. I didn't cry. I heard Helen awkwardly thank Caleb for me. Then the sound of the door closing. Not an end, just a comma, a pause I needed to take to remind myself I was walking in the right direction, never turning back. Back home, I hung my coat. The snow on my shoes hadn't melted. I sat at the kitchen table, poured myself a glass of water. The scent of pumpkins still lingered on my fingertips. I opened the drawer beneath the sink where I kept Harold's documents, property deeds, tax copies, temporary power of attorney papers. I laid them out on the table one by one. Caleb wants to start fresh. A branded life. Fine, I'll help him. But not with pie, not with tears, not with quiet endurance. I picked up the phone, dialed Harold. Francine, I thought today you'd rest. It's a holiday tomorrow. Harold, I said, I need you to file the revocation of residential rights. Lock all transactions related to the house. There was silence for a few seconds. Then he said, Understood. I'll prepare it. I set the phone down and walked to the living room. Light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows across the wood floor. I looked at my hands, the same hands that once held Caleb. Through every night, he cried for his father. Hands that folded diapers, steadied his first steps, signed away rights because he's my son. Now these hands would sign again, but not from unconditional love. This time for me. I woke at 6. Snow still fell, quiet as a late apology from winter. In the kitchen, I brewed black coffee and poured it into an old ceramic mug that read, Best Mom Ever. A 3rd-grade gift from Caleb. The word best had worn off. Only mom remained. Like me, still hanging on in his life. I opened my email. Harold's message was there. Attached was the official document revoking all rights to 245 Sycamore Avenue, Otter Haven, signed and notarized. I didn't need to read it. I'd already read every line in my mind, folded them inward for years. I printed 2 copies, one to send, one to keep, a truth I could hold on to. I still have rights, still have a name, still have worth. I wasn't angry with Caleb. I just felt empty. Motherhood, when turned into a tool, drains the soul from both ends. I loved my son in every way I knew how. But love doesn't mean allowing him to erase me from his life. I put on my coat, slipped on my boots, sealed the document in a yellow envelope, and stepped outside. Helen had just arrived. She rolled down the window. Heading somewhere today? The post office, I said. There's a Thanksgiving gift I didn't get to send yesterday. She didn't ask. On the way, I saw a little girl helping her mother clear snow from the path. She wore a red puffer coat and held a plastic shovel. After each scoop, she looked up and smiled. I thought of Caleb. Wintry mornings when it was just us. But like old photos, memories often fade until only the light remains, faces long gone. At the post office, I mailed the envelope priority. The clerk asked, "Signature confirmation, ma'am?" I nodded. Yes. When I stepped outside, the wind slapped my face, but I didn't feel cold. I felt light. That evening, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat by the window, watching snow fall and the glow of distant houses. Every house had lights on. Every house had people gathered, breaking bread, sharing stories, clinking glasses.
Not me.
But for the first time in years, I knew I didn't need to stand outside a party with no seat for me. I didn't crash my son's celebration. But tomorrow, Caleb will receive what I truly prepared for him. Nothing cuts deeper than the truth, unless you still believe you stand above it. I was in Harold's office by 8 in the morning. Outside, the snow fell heavier than the day before, white sheets pressing against the windows. The room looked just as worn as the first time I walked in, a scuffed wooden desk, a rusted typewriter in the corner, and the wall clock stuck at the same time for 3 weeks. But today, everything felt clear, as if the years of endurance had melted into this winter cold. Harold handed me a folder. "You still hold 30% of Caleb's company, plus 2 properties, one in Otter Haven, one in Austin. Everything's still in your name or co-owned." I looked at the printed line. Francine M. Holloway, co-owner. My hands trembled slightly, not from the cold. "What do you want to do?" Harold asked. "I'm not selling," I said, firm. "I want to donate it all to the Community Scholarship Fund, named after my husband. He always wanted to help kids who had no one behind them." Harold looked up, paused. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure." I signed at each page. The blue ink smudged slightly, my fingers a little damp. At the end, Harold slid over a single sheet, "Confirmation to file legal action. Just submit this at the town hall. It becomes official." I folded it carefully. "Thank you, Harold, for not asking me if I'm sure again." He smiled. "I didn't ask because I know this time you're not stepping back." I left his office at 9:30. Snow blanketed the walkway. I drove myself to the town building. My old Toyota was still running fine, though one wiper blade had broken off. The clerk was young. Her eyes scanned from Caleb's name on the file to my face, a flicker of surprise she didn't bother to hide, but she said nothing, just lifted the stamp and brought it down with a sharp thud. That sound to me was more final than any courtroom verdict. I took the receipt, my hands steady. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. This act was the letter I'd been writing all my life. That afternoon, Harold called. "Caleb's received the papers. I think you'll hear from him soon." "I know," I said. That night, I didn't turn on the porch light. I wanted the house to sink into darkness. I wanted Caleb to knock in silence, no path lit, no place to cling.
And he came.
9:17 p.m. I heard the hum of his electric car, a sound I'd heard hundreds of times before. Fast footsteps, fists pounding on the door. "Mom, open up." "What the hell are you doing?" I stood behind the curtain, unmoving, unshaken. "Are you trying to make a scene? You think you can steal back the spotlight by ruining me?" I heard Talia's voice too, softer, shaken. "Caleb," I checked. "I don't have rights either. It's all in your mother's name. The house, the major investments." Silence. Then the sound of glass shattering. Caleb cursed. Another bang on the door. I stepped out and opened it. He stood there, hair a mess, shirt unbuttoned, eyes bloodshot. "Why?" he shouted. "Why would you do this to me?" I looked him straight in the eye. No trembling, no flinching. "To teach you how to start over like I once did with only my hands." Caleb froze on my doorstep. For the first time in years, his face held nothing familiar. No smug grin, no dismissive stare, just emptiness. Like a child lost in a supermarket, too old to admit he's afraid. I didn't shut the door right away. I let the cold wind rush in. Let us both stand there, mother and son, on opposite ends of a distance too wide for feet, measured only in years and words left unsaid. Caleb turned and walked away. Said nothing. I didn't call after him. When his car rolled off, I gently closed the door. Not locked, but not open either. I sat in the chair, leaned back, and closed my eyes. In the dark, I saw the woman I was 30 years ago, washing dishes at a diner, counting coins to pay tuition. Back then, I believed if he succeeded, I'd never regret a thing. And I was only half wrong. I don't regret what I gave. I regret staying silent for so long. The next morning, Harold called again. I know you don't need the update, but just so you know, Caleb filed a request for private mediation. He has no legal ground to retain assets. Everything is in your name. I wasn't surprised. I only asked one thing. Harold, can I also file to terminate all financial support, including bank guarantees? You can, but would you leave him with nothing? No, I'm leaving him with exactly what he truly has. Then yes, you can. I ended the call and stepped onto the porch. The snow had stopped. The air was so clear it stung my lungs. I sat in my wooden chair, pulled a thin blanket over my knees. Talia arrived alone. No makeup, no designer purse, no Apple Watch. Just a woman in a thick coat, hands shaking from the cold, holding a paper bag. I brought pumpkin pie, she said. You make it every year. Today I figured no one else would. I didn't invite her in. I just nodded.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know the truth. I only learned after we got married that most of the assets were in your name. Caleb told me not to worry, said it'll all be ours eventually. I looked at the young woman in front of me and saw myself once standing before my mother-in-law, head down, swallowing truths I didn't dare speak. I'll start over, Talia said. Even if it means dishwashing like you once did. I didn't speak, just opened the door, placed the pie on the wooden table inside, and turned back, leaving the door open. That night, I pulled an old photo from the drawer, the one where I stood in the middle, holding Caleb's hand at his college graduation. They'd cropped me out of the online version, but the original was here, untouched, uncut. I framed it, placed it on the highest shelf, not to show off, just to remind myself I was the root. And roots don't need to be seen. They just need to remember that without them, the tree wouldn't stand. Late at night, I heard a car again. No knocking this time, just slow, hesitant footsteps. Then silence. I opened the door. Caleb stood there, shoulders low, hands empty. Why? He asked. No shouting, just a question. Not seeking forgiveness, just understanding. I looked him in the eye and answered, to teach you how to start over like I once did with only my hands. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is to step out of someone's life and let them face themselves. I thought I would cry when I read the letter, but I didn't. I just sat quietly on the doorstep, hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea, reading line by line with eyes that no longer held expectations. I'm sorry for never seeing you as a person of your own. Just a familiar figure I knew would always be there. I folded the letter, didn't read it again. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because for the first time I no longer needed to exist through someone else's eyes. The next morning I woke up early. A light dusting of snow covered the steps, not as thick as days before. I baked a small apple tart, carefully laying each slice in a spiral across the top. Not for Caleb, not for anyone special, just to bring to the community gathering at the Otter Haven Center, a place I'd never been, though it's only a few blocks away. I wore my old gray turtleneck sweater, worn but clean. Wrapped the scarf Miriam gave me last year. She said it was cheap, bought at the local market, but I'd kept it safe because I knew someone thought of me enough to buy something on a cold afternoon. The Otter Haven Center wasn't large, but it was warm. The hall had been decorated the day before. Paper, maple leaves, a small Christmas tree set up earlier than usual, twinkling lights strung from the ceiling. I placed the tart on the buffet table. An older woman with white hair approached, looked at the tart, then at me. Your Francine? She asked, her voice raspy but bright. Yes, and you are?
I'm Elme.
Your mother taught me how to make cinnamon bread in 1964. I recognized you. You look just like her. I smiled. Not perfectly, but genuinely. Some connections in life arrive like that. A button from an old coat that somehow fits a jacket we never thought we'd wear again. We sat at a small table near the window. Outside, snow began to fall softly. Miriam showed up late as usual, carrying a big tin. Pecan clusters, no sugar, she announced with a sideways glance, for those of us avoiding sweets. And I think after today you should join my memoir writing club. I chuckled. What would I even write? You have a life, Miriam said without hesitation. A thin man with silver hair came over, raising a glass to us. Water. Since no one in that room drank anymore, I stood. No one asked me to speak, but I wanted to. Just a few words.
I'm Francine.
Not just someone's mother, but me.
No applause.
None needed. Just a few quiet glances, as if they understood. Because here, no one had to perform anymore. No one had to be someone to anyone. We were simply people who had lived long enough to learn that sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let go. I walked home just as the gathering ended, carrying half a tart in its tin. Miriam offered me a ride, but I declined. I needed to walk, to hear the crunch of my boots in fresh snow, to feel the cold sink through the fabric. It was how I reminded myself I was alive, not to be needed, but to live for me. I'd spent the last few days cleaning my small house, throwing out things that belonged to a time when my whole routine orbited one question: will Caleb call today? I placed a photo frame on the shelf, an old family photo, the one where I'd been cropped out. I had printed a replacement piece from another photo. It didn't match exactly, but I liked it that way. Imperfect like me. No longer whole, but whole enough for myself. I lit the fireplace and turned on the little holiday lamp Helen gave me last year. She said it didn't shine evenly anymore, but still gives warmth. That was enough for me. Night fell. I pulled out a blank notebook, untouched except for one penciled line on the first page. I used to think my life was just a shadow. Now I know I was the light. I don't know how much I'll write. Don't know if anyone will ever read it, but that no longer matters. Caleb didn't call, and I didn't wait. I know he's somewhere. Maybe in a rented apartment. Maybe starting over at his very first job. I don't wish him pain. I only hope that on some quiet day he'll remember me. Not as a shadow with a name Mom, but as a woman who once walked beside him, then walked away, knowing she couldn't walk his path for him. Near midnight, I took the leftover tart to the backyard. Snow fell gently. I broke off a piece, placed it on a small plate, and set it on the windowsill. Not for anyone, just an old habit from the days when Caleb was little. I used to save him a piece in case he fell asleep before dinner. I know the tart will harden by morning. No one will eat it, but I still do it because some things don't need a reason. Only peace in the heart. I went back inside, turned off the lights, and left only the glow of that small lamp on the table, flickering, uneven, but enough for me to see myself in the mirror. Not somebody's mother. Not the one who once sacrificed. Just me. I left the gathering with a half-eaten tart. I don't know if anyone will walk this next stretch with me, but I know the old shadow no longer walks beside me. This winter in Otter Haven feels less harsh than usual. Or maybe the cold no longer seeps into me the way it used to. Lake Otter is no longer a gray mirror of sorrow. It's a still surface reflecting a sky that shifts day by day. I've stopped searching its waters for reflections of the past. Now I watch it to see when the wind changes, when the first migrating birds return. I've started a new kind of work. It has no name. It brings no money. And it's just for me. I mend old quilts in a wooden chest I hadn't opened in 20 years. I found the fabric pieces of a lifetime. Floral cotton from the first dress my husband ever gave me, striped wool from Caleb's childhood coat, the one he wore when he hid behind my legs, and a piece of cream silk from the scarf I wore at his wedding, a ceremony that made me feel like a guest in my own story. In the past, touching these pieces brought only a dull ache. But now, as I sit by the window, needle in hand, I know I'm doing something different. I'm not mending the past. I'm stitching the fragments of myself into something new. This quilt won't be perfect. The seams will be uneven. The colors won't match, but it will be warm, and it will be mine. Each stitch is a quiet declaration. I was here. I am still here. Sometimes Harold stops by, not to talk paperwork anymore. He brings homemade bread, and we sit on the porch sipping tea, talking about nothing in particular. A book he just finished. A new rose variety Miriam planted this year's hopeful fishing season. We are two old souls, not trying to fill silence with words, but sharing it. Like two people sharing a quilt on a cold night. No one asks about Caleb anymore. They don't need to. They look at me, and they see Francine. While cleaning one afternoon, I found Caleb's old green plastic dinosaur. One leg missing, paint chipped. I held it in my palm. Not with anger, not with regret, but with a distant tenderness. Like looking at a star whose light is only now reaching you long after it's gone out. Love, I've learned, doesn't have to disappear. It simply changes shape like water. Sometimes a raging river, sometimes a still lake, sometimes just a soft mist after a long night. I placed the dinosaur on the windowsill, not to wait, but to acknowledge it was part of the journey. I no longer write memoirs at the club. I realize my story doesn't need to be inked on paper. It's written in the creases around my eyes when I smile at Miriam. In the way I knead dough every Sunday morning, in the strength of my arms as I haul a fresh stack of firewood inside. Life isn't what we recount. It's what we live. I don't know how Caleb and Talia are now. I don't seek updates. Forgiveness, to me, isn't a grand act. It's a peace so deep you no longer need to forgive because the burden of needing to is simply gone. I've given my son the greatest gift a mother can give, freedom from her shadow and from the weight of living up to a love that had lost its shape. The snow has begun to melt. Brown patches of earth peek through wilted grass, promising spring. I wrap my newly stitched quilt around my shoulders. Step out onto the porch. The chill is still there, but the air carries the scent of renewal. I take a deep breath. For the first time in many years, I'm not waiting for what comes next. I'm simply here, feeling my own presence.